So here at REMI, we are the leading provider of local, state, and national economic policy modeling. We are, from the ground up, built to improve public policy through quantitative analysis that we provide through our economic modeling software and consulting services. And it sort of informs the policy decisions that are taken that impact Americans' everyday lives. We were founded in 1980 on the principle that decision makers should test their policies before they implement them, answer the what if questions before they actually go ahead and implement something. All right, so here a bit more about us. As I previously said, we are driven by the mission of improving public policy, and our models are custom built to fit the needs of any local, state, or national level client. And we can also do sort of custom combinations of counties or other geographic units. And a few clients of ours, this is what we consider a representative sample of the types of people we work with. We have universities, sort of interest groups like the AARP, consultancies, and accounting type firms, state agencies like the NC Department of Commerce, big intergovernmental organizations, and many, many more. So I'm just going to run through a little bit of background on what we're talking about today and why it's important. And, let's get right into it. So ride sharing is something that I'm sure all of you have dealt with in your day-to-day lives, or at least heard about. It is available in most metro areas of the United States. And it provides, a really quick and individualized transportation solution. So that enables flexible connections between sort of industrial areas and people's residences at scale, though on a sort of a very atomized basis. Even though you're taking people, individual by individual, or sometimes there's a few people in a car, because of the way these ride-sharing apps work, they can actually move a lot of people by just matching everybody with drivers. But for a lot of Americans and people all over the world, it's not really an appropriately priced solution for commuting. So the average cost of an Uber is about $2 per mile. It varies by metro area. My home city of Boston is considerably more expensive than that. And the average commute distance in the US, there's a little typo there, is around 16 miles. So the average Uber trip for an average commuter in the US would be about $32 plus tip. So that's not something that most people are going to want to use for their daily commute, especially if they're paying that twice a day. So again, financially untenable for many Americans. So ride-sharing workers' incomes are also highly volatile, or at least have the potential to be as such, especially during times like these. There's sometimes very decreased demand for ride-sharing, or sometimes just not enough drivers on the road because of fears of contagions like the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So it's really sort of an unstable gig type job. So it is good for certain types of workers at certain points in their own lives, but it can also not be as advantageous for certain types of people if they're trying to support a family or build a long-term career in driving people around. So public transit, obviously, I think we're all familiar with what that is. It's a valuable service, but in a lot of US metro areas, it just doesn't really perform at the level that people would like it to. It often doesn't reach all of the major residential areas and doesn't provide good connections from all of those to the central business district or other sort of major industrial or employment centers within a city or larger metropolitan area. But the one thing it does do for certain is provide financially accessible commuting solutions, which is important because it allows employers to sort of bring workers in from a broad range of communities through those transit connections. And it also provides, for the people who work in public transit, a relatively quality, stable job when compared to ride-sharing work. And the public transit authorities typically provide all the amenities that are associated with government or sort of quasi-government employment. So here's a little bit of a like synthesis or sort of analysis of the way these two systems are going to interact, especially in the scenario that we've constructed here today. Sort of ride-sharing-esque services under the aegis of public transport authorities could sort of mix the positive attributes of both systems while sort of mitigating the downsides. Obviously, it's not going to be a replacement for either private ride-sharing or conventional public transit by bus or train, but it could provide some sort of an in-between solution that could add value in a lot of metro areas. Public funding for sort of ride-sharing-esque services to areas where there either are too few people to have a bus route or train route makes sense, or where there's some other condition that makes that sort of flexible solution more desirable. It could reduce paid prices for the people who live in those areas that aren't well connected to conventional public transit systems. So it could provide them a similarly affordable transit solution, and it doesn't require them to own and maintain cars, which is often difficult for people who are in those very same areas that lack good connections to public transit, at least when those areas are lower income. They would create a source of full-time employment for people who work as drivers within these public transit authorities or under contract for them. So it would provide a more stable and secure source of employment for that type of worker, and would make it a more sort of sustainable career for more people. And it has the potential to combine the affordability of public transit with the flexibility of ride sharing. So you have that reliable service that's always there. I know the bus is sometimes late, but at least in theory, it's always going to run on the days that it's scheduled to run. It doesn't, it's not dependent on, oh, do people want to clock in and drive for the MBTA today in my city of Boston? They have to show up every day of the week that they're scheduled to work. It's not the same thing as these sort of gig jobs. So you have a lot more reliability for customers, and you have a lot more potential reach where there isn't the sufficient infrastructure or sort of demand for a conventional bus or train route to make sense. However, on the downside, it probably won't cut average emissions relative to people using cars unless they cram more people into these ride-sharing type vehicles than the average sort of car trip in the U.S. crams into the confines of the average car in the U.S., or the vehicles are more efficient than the average vehicle in the U.S., which would just depend on whoever's procuring these vehicles and what kind of vehicles they buy. So just to have some more background on ride sharing, I'm going to go through some economic impact of Uber, which is the most famous ride sharing service in the United States, at least, and how it affects the economy as is. So the gross impact on GDP of Uber is about 17 billion. It doesn't that doesn't include the effect of Uber Eats, which is it's not ride sharing, so we're not analyzing it here. And the net impact we see as like $580 million of increased productivity, which is a pretty substantial addition for a private company. I know in a 22 and change $1 trillion economy, it doesn't seem like a lot, but this is one sort of private for-profit enterprise that's doing that. So that's pretty good. And $11 million in amenity value, not as much, but still not that bad. It's clearly providing a benefit to the economy, and we're better off having that sort of option. So we're just going to run through some calculations on the impact of individuals that we use to arrive at some of these numbers. This was something developed by May, so I'll talk through it as best I can. But if you have further questions about it, I will liaise between you and her, so we can clarify anything that I'm unable to do full justice to. So the average benefit per trip is about 168. There's substantial time savings per trip that equals to around $5.42. And $4.98 of amenity value, and the rider benefits add up to around 17.6 billion when considering all of the factors. So here are some of the calculations that we did here. This is really, May's work that I'm sort of relaying to you. So I apologize if I don't do it justice again. So we can see this ledger here. You have, out-of-pocket costs. So 48% of riders are saving money relative to another transportation solution that would hypothetically cost them more. And some people are paying more than they would. That's on average, more riders are losing money than saving money, but the people who are saving money are saving more money than those who are losing money. So that comes out to a positive on net. So parking cost, we see a substantial benefit there. I can attest to that personally. Parking is very, very expensive in many major cities. So not having to park when you're going somewhere is a major plus. Time savings, there's a lot of benefits here, and it comes out to, the traveler benefits come out to about 17.606 billion. So that's a pretty appreciable benefit, even in a society the size of the United States. And this is from an analysis of surveys that May did. So there are some benefits for a driver. The income from Uber and other sources is just north of 20 billion, and you see the opportunity cost income, like their income that they lose via opportunity cost. Again, this is not money that's coming out of their pockets. It's just what they could have otherwise earned if they were working in some other context, slightly less than that. So they gain a little bit north of 3 billion on net in total income, and there's added costs for vehicle fuel and maintenance, which is, obviously a big part of working for Uber. You do have to finance that yourself. So the net income gain is still just south of 1.4 billion. And the added value of flexibility and sort of non-pecuniary amenity effects is, just south of 3.9 billion. So you see a total benefit of 5.66 billion. So here's a few impacts that we developed for the effective ride sharing. It enables rides for some people without, access to convenient transportation, which would normally be either their own car or public transit, which I alluded to in the previous slides. So they were like, it's being used in situations where people see that their next best option is where riders report that their next best alternative has safety or weather protection issues. So that could be waiting for a bus in an unprotected, bus stop if there's not a bus shelter or, a proper train station, or they have like its availability, so public transit's bad, or they don't have a car and they'd have to walk. There are impacts on traffic. Some travelers, they use it to get to public transportation instead of, going the whole way with a car, where because you'd have to drive the whole way to your destination, you'd be contributing to traffic for longer. And most public transit facilities don't allow, individual motorists to park there. So that's sort of a unique capability of ride sharing that potentially cuts down on traffic by getting rid of individual vehicle long haul commuting. Some other travelers use it to get to areas with high parking costs, which does reduce parking demand, but it does allow ride sharing costs to remain comparatively high because parking costs are high. So the long-term effects are, people are deferring their car purchases because, they don't need to have cars as much because they can just use Uber to get places. It could reduce car ownership rates among that segment of the population, but it's not certain how much it's really going to supplant that yet. We need to see that for a few more years, and it's just generally more efficient for certain times and certain locations where public transit, walking, or having your own car are not optimal. So here's the simulation that we developed. I'm going to walk you through the variables we're using and the key effects of it. And then, I'll just talk through some conclusions and, what we might take away from this. So you can go ahead. So Transite is the simulation software we're using for that. It's our sort of transportation and infrastructure specialized modeling software. It has some unique functionalities like vehicle hours and miles traveled functions that you can import from your own data sets, and it is the premier solution for evaluating the economic effects of transportation policy. And it's been, it's grounded in like 20 years of experience in modeling and forecasting sort of transportation-related policy decisions. And yeah, it's sort of the leading product in this particular niche. So a little bit more about the model we're using. This is a demo version, which has 3 areas. It has urban counties, suburban counties, and rural counties. And the little blue thing is the urban one, the green one's suburban, and the red one's rural. This is based on some randomly selected counties from the Midwest that meet those criteria. And it has 70 economic sectors, which are just NAICS codes. And our historical data are 2001 to 2019, and our forecast years are 2020 to 2060. So here are the policy variables we're using. We have a change in consumer price and ground transportation. We are reducing that because we're modeling a program where this is integrated with public transit and costs are sort of reduced for people. Consumer spending on motor vehicles we're reducing because obviously people are not going to be using their cars as much, not buying new cars as much. That should go without saying. Consumer spending in other categories we're increasing to zero out the change in consumption because they're other commodities will just reflect an increase in their allocation of their disposable income across other areas because they're not spending as much on cars or transportation. So then we have government demand for passenger transit and ground transportation. We're funding it at a level of 1.5 billion spread by population because we're assuming this is a service that is used roughly according to how much, how many people are in an area. If there are going to be more people, they'll use it. There's going to be we're assuming there would be a linear increase in the usage of this program. So the funding is spread by that metric. We're increasing labor access by 0.5%, which is just reflecting sort of employers having an easier time getting at workers because this new service exists that will allow them to sort of pull in people from more diverse areas. And government demand for motor vehicles will obviously increase because the program will require vehicles and will require and we're sort of modeling it as a public utility, so it will be used. The government will be using more vehicles and parts for vehicles. So here's a quick economic summary. There's a lot of stuff going on in this graph, but importantly, we see employment, output, and GDP increasing substantially, especially at first, but as the years go on, the population grows and the relative impact of the program at its funding level decreases. It sort of tapers off. We can see that real disposable personal income per capita does decrease. It's probably because of the increase in consumption of these other goods. And yeah, you can see it's overall a pretty positive outcome. Total personal income does increase, but per capita goes down. So we can see employment by industry. Sorry, this graph looks a little bad because there's one real outlier here which spikes up a lot, and that is transportation services, because in this relatively small area, we're adding this big new program where we have a lot of people working in transportation services in this new sort of hybridized public transit and ride-sharing program. The other things that you'll see going up a lot include leather and sort of apparel manufacturing, which is really influenced a lot by labor access above anything else. So that benefits a lot. And everything else sort of modestly benefits, but there are no real standouts besides those. So we can say labor access by industry. Again, we see it really spike up because of the government demand for transportation services, but everything else seems to be increasing relatively, in line. And total employment by region. You can see that the biggest beneficiary is suburban counties. And because this is sort of a labor access dependent thing, and in this simulation, the sort of employment in manufacturing is concentrated in the suburban counties. The thing that's going on here is that the suburban counties have more manufacturing, and the labor access index benefits manufacturing NAICS codes the most in this model. So it's boosting them a lot more. You can see that rural counties also benefit, but urban counties, which already have like a pretty good concentration of labor force and have a lot more specialization in various services type fields, don't benefit as much. But everyone is doing a bit better off. So yeah, just to conclude here, we have just a quick conclusion. This type of program has the potential to improve labor access and make the economy more flexible and accessible to more people living in more areas. Obviously, it comes with the drawback that it does cost more per person than conventional public transit, and it is going to potentially increase emissions if it isn't sort of structured in a way that uses cleaner vehicles to implement this sort of thing. But obviously, like ride sharing and public transportation are a natural sort of combination of services in the economy going forward, and have the potential to make sort of our public utilities more flexible if implemented correctly. So here are a few things, just briefly talking about the importance of economic modeling and why it matters to all of our customers and their stakeholders. First off, it can clarify like the economic implications of various policies before they're implemented, which is very helpful if you're in a policymaking role. You'd want to know what's going to happen before you send something into effect, or sorry, you put something into effect, and you can plan for those impacts or potentially roll something back before it comes out and has potentially negative impacts. You can make effective predictions about the effective policies, so you can avoid negative consequences or create sort of counteracting policies to deal with those consequences and optimize the use of resources. And it exists to inform policymakers with sort of standard, easily comparable metrics that are sort of easily understood across the ideological spectrum rather than just rhetoric or opinion. And it can help convince stakeholders as to the benefits or drawbacks of policies in their community. So it can help really sell new initiatives to the general public. So here's a few examples of our model and where it's been implemented. Obviously, it's all over the country, but a few standouts in my view are our Texas. Actually, you don't see it here, but it is used for fiscal impact analysis of appropriate sort of spending legislation at the state level there. There's also the impact analysis for Houston Galveston area councils, high capacity transit project. There's Medicaid expansion in North Carolina, and there's also the regional greenhouse gas initiative in New England, and the potential establishment of the Amazon headquarters in New York. So why should people like you or anyone else care about economic modeling, and why should they invest in it? Well, people need a software solution that can clarify, calculate, and communicate a quantitative narrative about, the proposed policy, both to policymakers and sort of key stakeholders and just the general public at large, so they can understand what this policy, whatever proposed policy that may be, will affect, the economy. And economic policy modeling can help agencies forecast the effects of policies, both, both upcoming and existing, really, before they're implemented or just before next year. Even if you're operating with no changes, it is useful to have modeling that can sort of be updated with data as new data become available, and you can just plug it in and see a useful and accurate forecast. So it's really it's an invaluable tool for guiding the policymaking process. It can formalize decision making. You run everything through the same test. You can get it right the first time. Pass or block legislation that will either benefit or harm the economy, and modernize and advance the governance process. So bidders and grants for contracts are an especially key sort of potential customer segment for economic modeling services, as they will need to, and already do need to, demonstrate that their proposals have a positive economic impact on host communities. And policy organizations and planners really need economic modeling to add quantitative rigor to their proposals, and making those clear to stakeholders.